All right, this is part 2 of epigenetics. So we're talking about epigenetics 101, just real basic kind of fundamental stuff, just to give you an understanding of how this works. And the way we're trying to get you to think at this point about the science of the mind, the science of the body, and how your genes do not control your position in life. They don't have a predisposition for you. Your genes are actually controlled by the environment. We talked about that in the last episode. So let's go right into this. What we're talking about here is epigenetics, the brain, and thoughts, and how these all work together. So let's talk about the brain for a few seconds. We've gone through this once before because we use this idea a lot with Mind Rewire. It's just a basic understanding of how this works and how you can connect to your subconscious mind and take apart neuroplasticity. So again, remembering that there's 2 hemispheres to the brain. There's a right side and a left side, right half and left half. They have a distinct fissures that divide the brain into lobes. Each hemisphere has 4 lobes. Each lobe is divided into different areas that serve different functions inside of your body. No one lobe or area functions alone. So it's really important to know that no matter what we have classified as a function of that area of the brain, or what we have classified as what that part does, the other parts pick up parts and pieces. And we know this because when they remove a piece of somebody's brain, sometimes you can actually retrain the person, or they can be retrained for other parts to pick up the missing pieces, the things that's gone. So we can still function and survive even though part of the brain is missing. It's a really interesting thing to watch people who have brain, I don't even know, disorders, or like a TBI, where part of their brain has literally been, I don't know, catastrophized, and watching them, light bulb moments come on in other areas of their brain, and watching them start to do things that they couldn't before, just because of practice, because of habituation, and using things like Mind Rewire to balance into the mind. And so at that point, they're accessing other areas to take over. So it's really cool to watch. But there are a complex system of relationships between the lobes and the hemispheres that serve each other and function together to create your functioning body. So just a picture of the brain, just so we can kind of motor through this really fast, just to give you an idea of how many different things they have labeled in your body. How do they know this stuff, right? How do the scientists know this is where things happen? Well, they stick little sensors on your head, or they'll stick, literally we're sticking sensors into people's brains and sending electrical charges just to see what would light up on a scan. So having people do different things while they were lighting up these scans. And so they came up with these kind of maps and saying, this is where this occurs, this is where that occurs. But it all functions together, and it all works and correlates together as a functioning whole, not as pieces and parts. So remembering that left and right brain, we were always told that one side was more analytical, the left side is more analytical, logical, verbal, the right side was more creative and intuitive. And remember how we had talked about, there was a period of time where that was actually a big deal. We wanted to know were we left-brained or right-brained. And I remember taking tests in high school over this, like fill this little form out, we can tell you which you are. And then you were supposed to play to your stronger suit. So if you were a creative person, you would go take more creative type classes. And if you were more analytical, you would tend towards math and science, which is what people tend to do anyway. But it kind of singled you out, thinking, well, and I know for myself, it definitely did. If I'm more creative, intuitive, and visual, then I'm going to definitely just do the things that, fit me in that bill. I don't need math. I don't need science. I'm not going to be good at it anyway. And that's basically how we kind of thought about it. Well, what we know now is it's better to use your whole brain. It's better to have analytical thought mixed in with your creative, intuitive abilities. It's better to have a little bit of creativity and intuitiveness when you're sitting there logically trying to reason through something. Right? As a whole, it just functions better. As a whole, you get better information. As a whole, it's just a better all-around thing to use. And that's how, it's your God-given right. You have a whole brain. You don't have a left brain or a right brain. You weren't born with one or the other. You were born with both. And so that's what we want to use. So like I just said, we were talking about how people missing parts of their brain. So again, back to the parts of the brain. Here's the question we're asking is when we're doing balances and working within the mind, we have these labels for things, and one of the labels is the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. Well, looking on a map like this, and you can go pull up different ones all over the place, and even Google and ask the question, where is the conscious mind? Because you won't find it on here. Where is the subconscious mind? You won't find it on here. And what they'll tell you is we don't know. We don't know where those are located. And there's a school of thought that says the brain is separate from the mind being outside of the physical body. It's that place where aha moments occur. And that's kind of the way I use the two as far as brain and mind go. Subconscious mind and conscious mind kind of get into a whole different thing, because conscious mind is that level where we're thinking consciously about things. You're aware of what's going on. And the subconscious mind, it is described as that edge of the iceberg that's underneath the water, so underneath that realm of consciousness, even though it's thinking and active and doing things, you're not really aware of what it's thinking, of what it's telling you, of what it's doing, but you end up in situations and acting and reacting according to whatever that subconscious mind is pulling up. And it pulls up stuff based on what you're in the middle of, based on things that you might catch a smell of something and it takes you to this place, or it throws you into a tailspin, or you might get super happy and giggly just from the smell of something or from the sight of something and not really know where that comes from. You just know that that thing always makes you feel good. So that's kind of the end of the subconscious mind. Do they know where it's at? They really don't. What we do know, we know that we know what all the different parts of our bodies do. We've been told and learned what they do, right? Yet something isn't quite right. It might be interesting. It's that weird feeling of but it isn't right, and you don't know, but you know. Kind of that really interesting, strange feeling that you'll get, right? If you can take that into your health, you would be thinking, I'm healthy, and you're healthy. You're in a healthy physical body, but you've been told because of your genes that you're going to be unhealthy. So you have this weird underlying current going on, and every time you go to a doctor, you have to write out all of those different diseases, right, on both sides of your family, because they want the family history. So the doctor uses both that information to remind you of the potential for becoming unhealthy, and then also as a list of things that he can do preventatively with medicine for you, maybe, right? So having those listed out just gives you this reminder, and it keeps that underflow. That's part of the subconscious mind. It's things you've been told, things you've been taught, things that you've believed, whether they're true or not, because of the things that you've learned, right? So sometimes it's the perception or the ideas of somebody else that we just take on as truth, whether they're true for us or not true for us. So Angelina Jolie is a really great example of this. She had radical breast tissue removal because she was told she had a marker that might someday cause cancer. That to me is absolutely nuts. She had both of her breasts removed because she had a marker that said someday she might get cancer. What we know right now is that marker is not indicative that you are going to get the disease. That marker is part of everybody's physical body. We have these markers in our system. You have cancer cells in your body. They're just not active. If you give them the right influence, if you give them the right body of information around them, that's when they become active, and that's when you end up with an issue. And so to keep that from happening, to keep from getting the cancer, what she was told was you need to, have this radical mastectomy and take the tissue out that could possibly be effective. And the weird thing to me is she's a really healthy person. I mean, she seems to do healthy things, right? And who knows, it could have gone one way or another. But I just think that's a really super radical thing to do based on the idea that something might happen, because that also means it might not happen. What's your thought process? Where do you let your head go on stuff like that? What are you putting into your body? What are you bringing into your environment that would cause you to go down a road like that? Right? So just something to think about in that regard. And it's that weird undertow, right, that took her under and made her afraid enough. She went into fear enough that she decided to go do that. A lot of people are struggling trying to figure this out. A lot of people have this same kind of feeling, this same kind of weird undertow that they're feeling all the time. And we're repeatedly told to be aware of the diseases in your family, so it kind of keeps it right at the tip of your mind that they're genetic. But we know now that the gene is not a mechanism that can self-actualize. It has no control. It can't make the decisions, and it can't cause an action on its own, that it takes the environment to cause that to happen. A gene is a piece of the DNA, right? We have talked about this, which is just a blueprint to you. So with that undertow, this is just another really good thing to balance if you're a student of Mind Rewire. It's a good thing to take control of, take authority over, because when you do, my guess is you get to stop playing these games inside your head. Am I going to get the disease? Am I not going to get the disease? And if it's in that undertow of the subconsciousness, we get to knock that right out. So DNA is made out of a long twisted strand that contains complementary genetic information, like a picture, and it's negative, right? So you've got kind of that double exposure thing there. The gene is a segment of DNA that is passed down from parents to children and confers a trait to the offsprings. Genes are organized and packaged in units called chromosomes. So this was taken right out of, off online, but it was out of encyclopedia. A gene is a segment of DNA that is passed down from parents to children and confers a trait to the offspring. And in that, what they include is personalities and diseases. The gene needs information to do anything, and that's something you just have to know. I want to beat this into your head. The gene needs information. What information are you giving the gene? It gets the information from you. It makes it appear as if it can be turned off and on, and you'll hear that terminology that you can turn the gene on and turn it off, but that's not what you're really doing. What you're doing in reality is allowing that gene to express based on the information given to it through your environment. So whatever information you're giving that gene, it's expressing that information based on the environment you've put around it. It's not like a light switch that you're turning off, on and off. So information to the cell can come from, we're going to go a little bit deeper into this than we did last time. It can come from food, oxygen, water. It can come from stress. Stress definitely gives you information to the cell, because with the stress load, you're bringing up and down the neurochemicals in your system, right? Stress would be oxytocin. No, it wouldn't. That would be the other one. Stress would be cortisol, right? Oxytocin would be on the good side when you're thinking a happy thought. What else can give information to your cell? How about the energy from another person? Have you ever stood next to somebody that just made you feel creepy, weird, and you got these strange feelings from them? Do you think that's informing your body and your cells of something? What about a thought? Whether it's a thought that you came up with originally or a thought that somebody else handed to you and kind of implanted into your mind, like from your childhood. Spoken word. Words that people speak over you can be powerful. They can bring life and they can bring death. Just the spoken word. Right? And those can turn into memories. They do turn into memories, and they become repeated memories. And when you repeat things over and over that are negative, what does that do in your life? What does that do as information to the cell? If you keep giving the same information, the same negative information to a cell, what do you think is going to happen to it? My guess is it's going to become unhealthy. So back to the brain for a second. As you think, the thoughts are forming on your brain. At a cell level, it's that neuron binding to a protein. The gene is expressing based on your thought. So you're thinking the thought from your mind, bringing it into your brain. We're creating matter with a neuron and protein binding. The gene expresses based on your thought. If the thought is positive or negative, you're also releasing chemicals and hormones that correlate to the thought. So now you have this thought that you just now thought. We created matter to it. You made neuroplasticity. You're creating a neural pathway. And if it's a good thought or a bad thought, you're also getting that release of chemicals that correlate to that thought. So every time you go back into that, guess what you get on those chemicals? You either get the positive stuff or you get the negative stuff. Every time you go back to that thought, it's going to take you back to that chemical outpouring. Your thoughts become registered in with the chemical correlation of that first time you had that thought, whether it was positive or negative. So if the thought was not a good one, if it was something that really hurt you, if it was something that upset you, something that, gave you a bad feeling, and you keep going back to it over and over, you're raising that chemical bar in your body. You're keeping cortisol active. You're keeping adrenaline alive. You're keeping those things revved up in your system if it's on the negative side. And what does that do to us on a health level? Drives our health down, right? It makes you very unhealthy. So let's talk about neuroplasticity. When the thought occurs in your mind, the protein and neuron bind together, turning that thought into matter. The thought has the chemical associate as well as the memory attachments that you'll go back to as information to draw on for support throughout your life. So if we don't clean up this neuroplasticity at some point, you keep going back to this information, and every time it comes back up in your system, your brain will look through, what do I know about this? What do I know about this? And it'll pull up the file that it knows the most, that it knows the best. Whether it's coated with cortisol, adrenaline, and neuroepinephrine, or whether it's coated with serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. You're pulling up whatever that memory is as well as the chemical associate. And then you're going to end up in the place that you end up. So hopefully you're pulling on more positive memories and positive thoughts than you are negative. But unfortunately, most of us are not. So your thoughts do become matter, and your thoughts do matter, but they do become matter. From your mind, the thought, to your brain, turns into matter. You are creating neuroplasticity that stores the thoughts and memories, and that's neural pathways that we like to refer to as the subconscious mind. So before we were saying on that brain map, where is the subconscious mind? Where does it sit? I seriously at this point think that neuroplasticity, and it's the way they talk about it, that it stores the memories, the thoughts, like you're creating it. Every time you go back to that thought, the synapse fires and they get closer and closer. It happens faster and faster. It's the same thing, the same way we talk about the subconscious mind. It's that storage vault of thoughts, beliefs, and memories that we hold on to. So I think they're the same thing. The subconscious mind is a way to name the part that we know exists because we reference it all the time by referencing memories, but nobody will say where that is. But if you look at what we know neuroplasticity does now, I believe they are the same thing. It's just never been located, and doctors won't say where it is, or scientists. And neuroplasticity, we know where that is. It's in your brain. It's all throughout your brain. Every time you think a thought, you create matter, and it literally in your brain on a brain scan looks like a tree branch growing throughout different areas of your brain depending on what you're thinking and where. It can depend on a ton of things, but what you're doing in the moment that you're thinking the thought. So based on a little of the function, it's the same as the neuroplasticity that forms with thought and serves us to remember things. It's the same thing. We know it's moldable when we talk about neuroplasticity. It's moldable, it's malleable. If you're in a pattern and change the way you think, you can change the pattern. Right? We've all done that to some degree or another. If the pattern is a pattern of overeating, so let's go back to the overweight person. Let's go back to my mom being fat and I'm fat. If the pattern is a pattern of overeating and you change the model of what food is for that person, you can modify the way they eat. And then the outcome of overweight can change. Right? So there's little modifications along the way, but it starts with that pattern in your head that my mom was fat, I'm going to be fat. I worried about it my whole young life. And I actually used to walk around telling myself I'm never going to be like that. But the model and the environment that I had in my life actually informed my body that was how I was, because I was a pastry chef for 22 years. So that was what I was going to be. Right? So I pretty much ate everything I made, and it showed, but it was tasty. So anyway, so interesting stuff to me. What else does this work with? Emotions, right? We know that influx of chemicals going up and down is going to bring our emotion state up and down. You're creating neuroplasticity to that, locking it into your subconscious mind. How about trauma? Traumas can get locked in hardcore, right? They can make neuroplasticity hard, deep, and fast. Life issues, repetitive patterns. The more you think it, the more you think it, the more you think it, the more you think it. It just keeps going and going and going. What about disease and allergies? We know it works that way, and you can actually undo it the same way. If you overthink having a disease, guess what's probably going to happen? Probably. Allergies can come from many different sources. I've actually heard a doctor speak about allergies and phobias actually as being the same thing, but one's in relationship to environmental things, so things on the outside of your body, and that would be allergies. And the other one occurs the exact same way, and they call it a phobia, but it's because of the internal thing that you're struggling with. But it presents very much the same way, an allergy and a phobia. How interesting is that? So think about it. What if it has driven your disease process, came from spoken word of a doctor or a person telling you about how you're going to end up and what diseases you're going to get? And that's an easy one to kind of think through. What was said about that thing that has driven you down that path? What about issues in your life? What have people said about those issues? What have you heard about those kind of issues? What have people said, well, when I went through that, here was my outcome. And you just stood there kind of reeling, going, oh no. And instead of rejecting it, you accepted it, and then it played out. How about traumas? From a young age, those are tough because we didn't know what was going on. And I'm not saying that it's a fault of anybody. But when that trauma happens and then it reoccurs and it happens again, how do you walk your way out of that? And what was said about those things to you that sealed it in even bigger? It's like when a child falls down and they hurt themselves and immediately start screaming, and all the parents freak out, all the people around them freak out, oh, and the child freaks out even harder. That's a little mini trauma going on. You just now caused trauma in that child's life by all the screaming and stuff. What would happen, and you see parents do this too, if the kid falls down and they just kind of ignore it? And I'm not saying that's the right way to do it. I don't know the right way. We tried both. I don't know the right way. But what would happen if you taught the kid to shake it off instead of ignoring it or freaking out when it happened? And literally a right-left pattern, a head shake across the body, or crossing their arms and legs and just sitting there and letting it kind of come out of their system, putting them into a whole brain state to help it come out of their system. Where would those kind of traumas and those little things like that be then? Even the big things in the moment when it's going on, if we could shake those things off instead of internalizing them and holding on to them like they're part of our life and they become part of our belief system. So we see people reverse and end, and we're back to talking about diseases again, but we see people reverse and end disease processes all the time with things like laughter therapy, just changing their mindset about it and rejecting it. That's not me. I'm not a diabetic. I'm not a diabetic. And the more you tell yourself that, the more your body starts doing the things necessary to get you out of that problem, because where your head goes, remember, your body goes. Your body will not go somewhere if your head's not there driving it. Your brain has to be attached, moving with it to get it to the place it gets to. So eventually, if you keep telling yourself, I'm not a diabetic, you're going to start making the nutritional alterations to get you there. It's interesting how it all works together. And when you understand this and you know it, you can help it through the process. Why does it work this way if the gene is the issue? Well, because the gene's not the issue. You are not genetically predispositioned to these things. Brown hair is another thing. Brown eyes, blue eyes, right? Those kind of things you probably are. I mean, you could sit there and think about it and try and change it. And if anybody ever makes that happen, I really want to know about it because I think that would be crazy cool. My guess is that's a rough one to actually get to change just by sitting there in a meditative state and thinking through it, or even putting yourself in a whole brain state and trying to change it. But the gene is not the issue. It's not a preconceived or pre-genetic thing that's happening with the disease process. You're getting the information from the environment somewhere, whether it came into your being through your parents' being, but it also at that point had come into their environment, right? Their gene started expressing a certain way. Your gene is expressing that way because you continued the same pattern that they were doing. And we learn those patterns from our parents. So my question is always the same. Is the information I'm giving my body, my brain, my mind, my heart, my spirit, does the information support life? Because if it doesn't, you might want to change that. You might want to do that a little bit differently, right? You can always change the environment that you're in and then change the outcome. How many different things have you done? And this is just kind of a cool thing to go back and reflect on. Write these things down. How many different things have you done in the course of your life that you know of where you changed an environmental piece of information, something around you, and then the outcome to what you were doing changed, whether positive or negative, because it will and it can happen both ways. What did you change? What was your outcome? Right? So for me, a huge one was my weight issues. Huge one was my weight issues. Lost 150 pounds because I changed the way I move, I changed the way I thought, and I changed the way I ate. And they kind of happened all at the same time. So your neuroplasticity is built based on a gene expressing. It is a gene expressing health, or is it going to express a line that somebody told you that you have X, Y, and Z disease, and this is what's going to happen to you in the next 4 months? We hear stories about this all the time too. How many people have you heard of that got a disease, got a diagnosis, were told what their outcome was going to be, and then lived it out to almost the day? It's awful, right? There's a story I've heard before about a guy that had cancer, and he started beating cancer, but the doctor had told him, it doesn't work that way. You probably have about 6 months to live. And the guy fought it and fought it. 6 months came and went, and he was still kicking, went back to the doctor, and there was still some cancer in there. And the doctor repeated his original assessment. You're lucky you made it this far, but you've probably got about this long to live. And the guy just threw his hands up, and sure enough, he died pretty much when the doctor had said. So you get to choose, do you accept or do you reject the assignment of somebody else's words? Because it will affect the way your genes are expressing. It's a very broad view of how this works, right? This is a huge broad view of how this works. And there's a lot of tiny working pieces to get us to an outcome. But this just will give you the understanding that if you believe something, you can cause it to happen. Positive or negative, it happens both ways. But you have the ability, you have the authority, you have the right to reject things in your life that aren't benefiting you, that aren't helping you. Words that people speak over you that don't match up, don't align with what your God-given path is. You can absolutely reject and say, no, I don't think that's for me. The things people say can become beliefs, and they do become beliefs. If you build neuroplasticity to it or store it in your subconscious mind, it can cause issues in the future. It can turn into things that you believe about yourself, believe about the world around you, and even for your kids can cause these issues. Because if you continue in the path, their genes are going to express what you've already taught yours to express. So this is how things get passed down the family line, is by the actions in the environment you've surrounded yourself with, and you continue to do that. You bring your kids into the world, and they're doing what you've taught them to do, because that's the right way to do it, because it's what they saw you do. And now they keep doing it. And what do we end up with? We end up with disease. their personality traits, right? Inbred characteristics. You ever heard that term? Like that's just inbred right into their system. And there's some cool things that can be that, but there's also some really dangerous things. And so you have to know that you can change those. It's not like it's set in stone. Neuroplasticity is malleable and moldable. So let's go back to that issue of overweight or of weight for an issue. So my mom was fat. I was told I would be fat. I was told that very constantly. Everybody, my aunts, my grandma, everybody was fat. By my mid-40s, sure enough, I was. My mother's weight was, I thought about it in my head all the time, that I'm not going to be that way, I'm not going to be that way. But finally, I made it happen because my environment supported the thought that I would get fat. It didn't support the thought that I wouldn't get fat. So my words to myself were on a conscious level, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm not going to get fat. That was the conscious level. On the subconscious level, I was living by the belief that I would get fat subconsciously because it's what I was told repeatedly over and over, and it's what I was told was part of my genetic predisposition. Could I have done it differently? If I had known, yes, I could have. But I didn't know, so that subconscious thought, every time food was in the picture, that whole subconscious thing would just kind of come up and turn into this turmoil, and food would win every time. I built beliefs around it. I built a support system around it. It did not support health. It supported death, and it got me pretty darn close to it. But I didn't know. Now I know. So what thoughts do you have in your head that support the outcomes you keep getting? This is one to sit down with. This is one to write down, sit down with it, pull out your journal. And for students of Mind Rewire, these are worth balancing, guys. What thoughts do you have in your head that are supporting the outcomes that you're getting? And if it's an outcome that you like, if it's a good outcome, how can you bolster it? How can you make it better? How can you make it bigger? So if you're going to do a balance on it, start with the outcome, especially if you can't think of a statement. Just go straight to the outcome. Think through the outcome. Think about what it is you're going through. And then go through the protocol. Do a whole brain balance and notice what changes. This is the best way to get you from point A to point B. And the fastest, right? So once you go through that outcome, then you're going to write a positive statement about what you want in your life instead. And then go through and balance that. There is a train of thought that says you can just go ahead and do a positive statement. You don't have to go through the negative, through the outcome that you're going through. And I'm not saying go through it like picking out all the horrible, nasty things of it. Just touch the edge of it. Bring it to the surface so that when you do balance it, you're unplugging that whole thing and taking apart that neuroplasticity and then seeding in what it is you want in your life. If the issue keeps arising, go after it. Every time you feel that issue in your system, you are going to go after it. Perseverance can pay off handsomely here. And if you do it, the second you feel it coming up in your system, you've already got a conscious awareness of it, and your subconscious mind is already opening up to release it. If you put that into a balance, and you're the one who knows, you're the one who goes through this, you're the one who's sitting with it all the time, how worth it is it for you to get rid of these issues that have plagued you, right? They cause consequences in your life. To get rid of this stuff could be priceless. I guarantee you, in the end, your children will thank you, and so will your children's children, right? Because you're not only cutting it off for you, you're changing their outcome, right? The genetic predisposition alters when you alter it. So blessings and peace. This was the second video of this epigenetic series. I hope it serves you well. If you have any questions, as always, please either get on a call with me or shoot me an email at Christy@mindrewire.com.